Okay, today we're going to talk about the skeletal system, and we're going to start off with some functions of the skeletal system. And the first one is structure. Just like this scaffolding is supporting this bridge, support or structure is something that our skeletal system does for us. So the first function is support. Next function is storage. A lot of people don't think of this one, but bones are very important for storing calcium, and we'll talk about that, how that is regulated in a bit. And it's also important for storing lipids, which are an important energy reserve. The next function is producing blood cells. Our red blood cells only live about 3 or 4 months, so we're constantly making new ones, and that happens within our skeletal system. The next function is protection. Just like this armor protects the sky, your skull protects your brain, and your ribs protect your heart and lungs. Next function is leverage, which is for movement. This picture is representing movement. Now, our muscles are responsible for movement, but if our muscles didn't have our bones to pull on, we wouldn't be able to move. Now, the skeleton can be divided into the axial and the appendicular divisions. And the axial skeleton is in yellow in this figure. It consists of the skull, the thorax, the ribs, the vertebral column, and its main function is protection. Then we also have the appendicular skeleton, which is this white grayish bone color. The appendicular skeleton is basically the arms and the legs, and its main function is movement. It's the bones of the appendages, and it's responsible for movement. We can classify bones based on their structure, their shape, and their structure. So first, flat bones. Here's a flat bone. And flat bones are flat. They include the skull, the sternum, the ribs, and the scapula. Then we have sutural or wormian bones, and these are found in between the sutures of the skull. And then the next type are long bones. Long bones are longer than they are wide, and they make up most of the bones of the arms and legs. Even our finger bones are considered long bones, even though they're not very long. But they're longer than they are wide, so they're classified as long bones. The next type are irregular bones. They have complicated shapes like this vertebrae. Then the next type is sesamoid bones. Sesamoid bones are small and flat, and they develop inside tendons. One that we all have is the patella. And then the last shape is short bones. Short bones are cube-shaped, and we find them in the wrists and ankles. Now, in addition to learning the bones, you're going to learn that there are several parts of bones. Like this here is a process. There are some holes here, fissures, foramen, sinuses, and these all have a purpose. These are called surface markings or bone features, and if there's an elevation or a projection like this, that's probably where a tendon or a ligament attaches. Elevations or projections form where tendons and ligaments attach and at joints. And then depressions, grooves, and tunnels indicate site where blood vessels or nerves lie alongside or penetrate bones. So like these holes you see, there's a nerve or a blood vessel that runs through them. And learning all of those will be the topic of the next chapter. Okay, Long bones transmit forces along the shaft, and they have a rich blood supply. We're going to learn a little bit of long bone anatomy. First of all, the epiphysis is the expanded area at each end of the bone, and it consists mainly of spongy bone. So the epiphysis is the ends, and there's one at each end. E for epiphysis and E for end. Then the diaphysis, or shaft, it's long and tubular, and it's made up of compact bone. In the middle of the long bone, we have what's called the medullary cavity, and it's filled with bone marrow. Red marrow is involved in the production of blood cells, and yellow bone marrow is adipose tissue, which is important for storing energy. And here we can see again the epiphysis, the diaphysis, another epiphysis at the end, and we can see they have a rich blood supply. And if we look closer at this membrane around the bone, you'll see this membrane is called it's a fibrous membrane called the periosteum. There's periosteum. And it contains blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and nerves. Now the bone consists of a calcified matrix along with several cell types. So if we look closer up at bone, we'll see these little cells right here. These are called osteocytes. Osteocytes are the mature bone cells. They maintain the protein and the mineral content of the surrounding matrix. And each osteocyte occupies a lacuna. There's lacuna. It's kind of a pocket sandwiched in between these layers of the matrix. And these layers are called lamella. Layers of matrix are called lamella. And osteocytes are connected to each other by canaliculi. And these canaliculi, they transport nutrients. You can see there's a blood vessel here in the center. And then the canaliculi go from those blood vessels out to each osteocyte. The next cell type we're going to talk about are osteoblasts. Osteoblasts produce new bone matrix in a process called ossification or osteogenesis. Osteoblasts produce proteins, and the main one is collagen, and other organic components of the matrix. And this matrix is called osteoid. Calcium salts are deposited in the matrix or osteoid, then converting it to bone. Then we have osteogenic cells, also called osteoprogenitor cells. These osteogenic cells are stem cells that can become osteoblasts, and they're important in bone growth and repair. And then another cell type we have are osteoclasts. Osteoclasts are cells that remove and recycle bone matrix. They are important for regulating calcium and phosphate ion concentrations in blood. Now, 2/3 of the weight of bone consists of crystals of hydroxyapatite. Hydroxyapatite, it is very hard, but it's inflexible and brittle, and hydroxyapatite is mostly calcium phosphate. But the combination of the collagen fibers with the hydroxyapatite makes bones very strong. And this picture here shows a bone that's been soaked in acid to remove the hydroxyapatite. You can see that bone is just like rubber, it's very flexible. So they need both the collagen, which is mainly the organic part, and the calcium phosphate, the crystal salts, to make it strong. Okay, compact bone is what we see here. This is what it looks like under the microscope. It consists of many parallel osteons. In this figure only shows 2, but there would be many. And then spongy bone, like here, consists of this network of trabeculae. The basic functional unit of compact bone is the osteon. And the parallel osteons give the bone great strength. Each osteon contains a central canal. Here's its central canal, which contains blood vessels and nerves. And some of that strength comes because these collagen fibers run in different directions, different lamella or layers. And that allows the bone to withstand twisting forces. This shows a spongy bone. Spongy bone is found where bones are not heavily stressed or where stresses arrive from many directions. And red bone marrow is found between the trabeculae of spongy bone, and it produces new red blood cells. So that's spongy bone. In appositional bone growth, which is appositional, layers of compact bone are added to the outside, to the outer surface of the bone by osteoblasts. If you look closer here, there would be osteoblasts in there. And the osteoclasts break down bone on the inner surface. So if we look, here's how you start out as an infant, and more bone is added on the outside by osteoblasts. Meanwhile, this bone on the inside is being broken down and absorbed by the osteoclasts. And then as you get older, that bone is totally replaced. And as you get older, that bone is totally replaced. And even as an adult, your bone continues to be replaced and remodeled. Also, right now we're going to look at bone membranes. This is the periosteum, which is a fibrous membrane that surrounds the bone, isolates the bone from surrounding tissues. It provides a route for the blood and nervous supply, and it participates in bone growth and repair. And as the bone grows, collagen fibers from tendons and ligaments are cemented into the circumferential lamella. So here's a fiber from a tendon or a ligament, and they get stuck into the bone. That makes for a very strong connection. Then the other bone membrane that we see is called the endosteum. This is on the inside of the bone. The endosteum is a delicate membrane that lines the inner surface of bones. It consists of osteoblasts and osteoclasts, and it's active during bone growth, repair, and remodeling. Now, how do bones grow? Most bones grow by endochondral ossification. Endochondral ossification replaces a cartilaginous model with bone. So the embryonic skeleton is formed first from hyaline cartilage, and that gets gradually replaced by bone. And as the cartilage enlarges, the chondrocytes, or the cartilage cells, okay, close up on this part, first step, these chondrocytes, which are cartilage cells, enlarge, and then they die and disintegrate, and then they leave cavities in the middle of the cartilage. Then blood vessels start to grow around the cartilage, around the edges of the cartilage, and some of the cells are converted to osteoblasts. And these osteoblasts form a layer of bone around the outside of the cartilage. So the first step is forming this thin layer of bone around the outside of the cartilage. Then blood vessels are going to penetrate the cartilage, bringing osteoblasts into the center, and these form what's called a primary ossification center. Here's ossification down there, ossification. And bone formation is going to spread along the shaft towards both ends of the bone. Then we have what's called cavitation. Occurs as growth continues and we create our medullary cavity. So that next step is cavitation. The shaft is going to become thicker and the bone's going to increase in length and diameter. Then capillaries and osteoblasts are going to migrate into the epiphyses, the ends of the bones, creating what are called secondary ossification centers. Then the epiphyses are going to fill with spongy bone, and they're going to leave a little bit of cartilage at the end of the bone. There's the cartilage at the end of the bone. And this is going to form the articular cartilage, which is going to be part of the joint. And there is cartilage left at the epiphyseal plate. And this allows for growth in length. So, and we're going to look closer at that next. So we're left with the cartilage here and here. And let's look at this epiphyseal cartilage next, because this is how our bones grow in length. If we look closer in, we'll see at the epiphyseal plate these chondrocytes, which are cartilage cells, they continue to divide and enlarge. And as they do that, they're going to push on the ends of this epiphyseal plate. They're going to degenerate and they're going to be replaced by bone. But as they keep growing outward, they make the bone longer in length. And this bone keeps growing, and that's how we grow in length. At puberty, the bone growth is going to catch up to the cartilage growth, and the epiphyseal plate closes. And we're left with what's called an epiphyseal line. And now the only cartilage you can see is here, this articular cartilage, which is part of the joint. Alright, next subject is intramembranous ossification. Intramembranous ossification forms new bone within a fibrous membrane. And what happens is these mesenchymal cells cluster together and start to secrete the organic components of the osteoid. And this is called an ossification center. Here's an ossification center. The bone grows outward from the ossification center in small struts called spicules. Here are some spicules. Osteoblasts get trapped inside pockets, and remember those pockets are called lacunae, and they differentiate into osteocytes. So now they're called osteocytes. Blood vessels grow into the area and they get trapped within the developing bones. Here's our blood vessels. Osteoblasts continue to build bone, resulting in a plate of spongy bone. And remodeling around the trapped blood vessels produces osteon, and the periosteum forms on the outside of the bone. So the last step, there's our periosteum forming, and it looks like osteons. And so here it is again. Here it is actually happening. Here's a blood vessel. Here's our ossification center. The osteoid is secreted. These osteocytes become trapped. and it grows, and the blood vessels get trapped in it. And here it is happening. The reddish part is the bone that's forming, and the rest is the cartilage. And here's our spongy bone formation, and the end result is a bone that looks like this. Remodeling around the trapped blood vessels produces osteon, and the periosteum forming on the outside of the bone. Alright, and here's an embryo about 10 weeks, and you can see only a few of the bones have formed. By around 16 weeks, we can see almost all of the bones have started to form. So next, let's talk about some abnormalities of bone growth and development. So the first one is this dude right here. He has what's called pituitary growth failure, which is inadequate production of growth hormone, which leads to abnormally short bones. It's not very common anymore because now we can treat it with synthetic growth hormone. Next one is achondroplasia. In this, the epiphyseal cartilages grow unusually slow, resulting in short, stocky limbs. So our long bones grow slower than normal. So the long bones, which makes up their arms and legs, don't grow as much as the rest of their bones. And that's what they look like. In Marfan syndrome, which is what this guy has, there's an excess of cartilage formation at the epiphyseal plate. This results in long, slender limbs, like this guy has. Another one is gigantism. There's a guy with gigantism. This results in an overproduction of growth hormone before puberty, so that causes your bones to grow excessively. The next one is fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva, and in this, bones form around skeletal muscles. So this guy has all kinds of extra bones, and that restricts movement and is very painful. Then in acromegaly, growth hormone levels rise after puberty, and bones can't grow in length anymore, but they get thicker, especially bones in the face, jaw, and hands. So that's acromegaly. Alright, bones play an important role as mineral reservoirs. You can see they're about 33% organic compounds, mostly the collagen protein, and 67% inorganic. They contain 99% of the body's calcium, as well as 99% of the body's phosphate. You can see that's what they're mostly made up of, is calcium. Calcium is important for muscle contraction, for generating nerve impulses, for blood clotting, and other physiological processes that we'll learn about later on this semester. And we'll see that calcium absorption from the intestines is hormonally regulated. And in the bone, we have osteoblasts depositing new bone matrix, and this removes calcium from the blood. And then at the same time, we have osteoclasts breaking down bone matrix, and this releases calcium into the blood. So these cells, osteoclasts, put calcium into blood, osteoblasts take calcium out of blood. Calcium is brought into the blood at the intestines, and the balance between osteoblast and osteoclast activity is hormonally regulated, and the levels of calcium lost in the urine are also hormonally regulated. So because calcium levels are important, we're going to see what happens when they get out of balance or out of homeostasis. So when our blood calcium levels fall, the parathyroid glands secrete parathyroid hormone, or PTH we call it, and PTH is going to go to bones. It's going to cause more osteoclasts to form. As these new osteoclasts form, the new osteoclasts break down bone and release calcium into the blood. PTH also increases calcium absorption in the intestines. And PTH also goes to the kidneys where it increases the production of calcitriol. Calcitriol stimulates calcium reabsorption by the kidneys as well as calcium absorption in the intestines. So all those things are going to increase calcium levels in the blood. Now calcium can also get too high. This is much more rare. But if they do, the thyroid gland secretes calcitonin. The thyroid gland's main hormone is thyroid hormone, but it also makes calcitonin. And calcitonin inhibits osteoclasts, so no bone is broken down, but bone continues to be formed by osteoblasts, so that's going to take calcium out of the blood. Calcitonin inhibits the kidneys, so less calcium is reabsorbed, so more calcium is going to be released by the kidneys and lost in the urine. And less calcitriol is produced, so calcium is going to be absorbed more slowly from the intestines. So that's how we regulate our blood calcium levels. Okay, bones can break or fracture, but they repair themselves relatively quickly because they have a very good blood supply. So the first step in fracture repair is hematoma formation, and this is basically a large blood clot. Because of all the blood supply, when a bone breaks, it breaks a lot of blood vessels and there's a lot of bleeding. So the first step is this blood clot or hematoma formation. Next, cells of the endosteum and periosteum are going to undergo rapid division and migrate into the fracture zone. An internal callus, which is a network of spongy bone, forms. So, spongy bone internal callus forms. And an external callus of cartilage and bone encircles and stabilizes the outer edges of the fracture. So this external callus is more cartilage at first. Then osteoblasts start to replace the cartilage of the external callus with spongy bone, and bone fragments and dead bone are removed and replaced. And then finally we have bone remodeling that occurs as compact bone replaces the spongy bone. And at first you'll see this enlargement where the fracture was, but over time that goes away. And after usually 3 months you can't even tell there was a break. Alright, so last thing we need to talk about are fractures, and we can classify fractures several ways. A transverse fracture occurs, and this is the most common type, it occurs across the long axis of a bone. And that's where bones are the weakest. If you try to break a bone, if you try to compress a bone, that's very hard to do because of the arrangement of the osteons. A spiral fracture like this one is produced by twisting stresses. A displaced fracture like this one is where the bone ends are out of alignment. A non-displaced fracture, the bone ends retain their normal alignment. This is a compression fracture, which is what occurs in vertebrae sometimes, usually in people with osteoporosis. In a green stick fracture, one side is broken and one side is just bent. And this only happens in children. In a comminuted fracture like this one, the bone shatters. An epiphyseal fracture is at the epiphyseal cartilage, and this would only happen in children before puberty. because there's cartilage there, it's not as strong. And if it's repaired right, it can be fixed. If it's not repaired right, it can kill those cartilage cells and stop bone growth there. A pot fracture occurs at the ankle, and it affects both the medial and the lateral malleolus. And then a Colles fracture is a break in the distal portion of the radius that might happen when you reach out your hands to catch a fall, and you end up breaking your wrist. And that is the skeletal system.